You're listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to the Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft, people who play it. Today is a day in October, because this is going to be coming out a little bit later on. So if you're someone who is listening to this now, you're like, it's September. But no, it's going to be coming out a little bit later on. My name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the channel. By now, you know that Jason is traveling, but we have him here coming live to us from not traveling because this is one of those filler episodes we're putting in. So Jason, how you doing today?
Yes, through the magic of the internet and data storage, calendars. Yes, I'm here, even though we are not live with an episode this week, but we wanted to make sure that we have plenty of stuff to talk about and that the show is rolling, along. And, we've had a chance to do a couple special episodes of late, just schedules have come together, which is awesome because we get a lot of great feedback about those episodes. And we had Ted on back over the summer, and we have another amazing guest joining us to just talk about WoW and the whole journey around it. So I'll throw it over to you for the intro.
Yeah, sure. Joining us today is our friend, Josh Allen, otherwise known as Devilor. And he is, hanging out with us today on the show, talking about how he got going in World of Warcraft. So how are you doing today,
Hello.
Josh?
Hi, it's me.
Welcome back.
No problem.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, it's been a bit since we had you on to talk about WoW. I think you were still on the Blizzard team back when we last had you on. It's been a little bit.
I think so, yeah. It was either while I was on the Blizzard team or before I was at Blizzard. It was a long time ago.
It was a while. So it's good to have you back.
Time is a flat circle. Yeah.
It certainly can be with World of Warcraft. But yeah, so these episodes tend to be focused around getting to know large community influencers. You yourself have been someone who's been around World of Warcraft and video games for a large part of your life, and we want to kind of get to know you a bit better, and we call these Why I Wow. So how about we start off with you telling us about what sort of your first experience was with video games, like in general. Like what was like the thing ages ago when you were playing MUDs or you were playing some sort of, typing game or whatever it was that got you started and made you think, hey, you know what? I like video games. This is neat.
Yeah. I mean, I did get into MUDs eventually, but that wasn't really my first gaming experience because I'm old. Mm-hmm. So my first gaming experience as a kid was my parents had a Atari 2600, mm-hmm. which was one of the first like home gaming consoles. And so I used to, that was back in the days when video games were called things like Jet or Tank.
Yeah, I remember playing
baseball.
Golf. I played golf on Atari.
Yeah.
Yep, I played Atari Golf. Yep.
Yeah. So that was my first experience. We had the Atari and we had it was a console called an Intellivision by Mattel, which was this hilarious if you ever like feel like laughing at how ridiculous video games used to be, look up the Intellivision controller because it looks like one of those like old school like mobile phones back before you had like actual like smartphones and so on. Nowadays it looks like one of those, like it has a keypad on it, and they were like, you know what we need for buttons, we'll just do 1 through 10. That's what it is.
They're ahead of their time with the keyboard.
The console had wood grain on it, like faux wood grain on the console. So that was the era of home electronics.
It had to match your living room, right? Your living room
it had to match the TV and
Yep. Everything was that laminate back then. Man, yeah, so that's early on for video games for sure. But what was your first Blizzard game then that you sort of moved towards? Were you a StarCraft player, a Diablo original player, a Vikings game player?
Yeah, my first Blizzard game, I didn't know it at the time because they weren't called Blizzard at the time, but my first Blizzard game was Rock and Roll Racing.
Yes.
I remember hitting that up when I was, again, very young and just being like, this is crazy. They've got music that I don't recognize because I had a very sheltered childhood. But then there's like racing and stuff and driving around in circles. It's great. Loved that game. Later on, I got super into StarCraft for a while. Was really into StarCraft, really into Warcraft 2. Spent a decent amount of time on the original Warcraft also, but it was Warcraft 2 and StarCraft that really started to hook me. And then when I was like, I also briefly after my like StarCraft and Warcraft 3 phase, basically I was into Warcraft 3. That was also around the same time that I started getting into MMOs. And then I heard that Blizzard was working on an MMO and literally refreshed the website every single day for the amount of time between the announcement and the beta release, hoping to get a chance to play it. So
how many F5 keys did you burn through in that period of time waiting for that beta to start? Jeez.
Yeah, at the time I was working as a IT manager for a vehicle, a wheelchair accessible vehicle conversion company. So as you might expect, there wasn't a ton of IT needed for that. It was mostly manufacturing. So I was just spending most of my day trying to find out new information on World of Warcraft at the time.
Nice. So you mentioned other MMOs. What was your first sort of MMO experience that you had?
That would be Anarchy Online, which is still one of my favorite MMOs of all time. And like, it's still up. You can still go back and play it. It's even free to play now. So every once in a while I boot it up just to go back there, wander around in circles, go, wow, this UI is garbage. Play around some more.
Yeah.
I played a lot of AO.
And Anarchy Online was the one where the community got together and ended up they were out of protest for them turning a lake into like an acid lake or something. They all went swimming in it, if I remember that correctly. It happened at one point.
Possibly.
Yeah,
that bit of trivia has escaped me, but
this was a long time ago. I remember hearing the story of it, of how players could influence the actual game outcome in a game like that. And one of the things that happened was, I think, due to an update, they made a very popular river next to a town basically acid, like poison to swim in.
Oh, I do remember that.
So then everyone like dove into this river and had swimming competitions in the acid river because they wanted it to be normal river again, out of protest for this change. So yeah, it was
crazy.
It was a neat experience to see what MMOs were back then, and of course it then developed into being where we're at now with MMOs, where they're coming out multiple a year and they're massively, as you would from the MMO part of it, massively revamped from where they were back then, as you talked about UI changes. So World of Warcraft, right? Before we dive into World of Warcraft, you mentioned you played a lot of Warcraft, the actual series before this, leading into it. You were someone who was into the lore and into the storytelling, or is it more of you just enjoy the gameplay kind of aspect of it?
It was definitely more, especially with Warcraft 3. And to some extent StarCraft as well. It was a lot more about the lore and the story of it. I enjoyed the gameplay, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't have been playing it. But I was never I spent zero time on BattleNet in StarCraft 2. I wasn't playing online outside of the custom maps and so on. Steal the Beacon was something that I spent a lot of time on in StarCraft
Wars.
2.
Yeah, a lot of things.
Yeah. And then playing things like Dota and Tower Defense in Warcraft 3. That was my multiplayer experience for those games. I mostly otherwise was just playing through the campaign and so on. So for me, a lot of it really was oh man, I'm I remember the experience of wait, I'm an orc, but a good guy? What's going on here? What's this? What's Thrall's deal? What's going on? So I just got really, really hooked on that. The orc is the bad guy, or the orc is the good guy, and the human is the bad guy? What is this crazy story?
Yeah, that was groundbreaking for the day, though. I mean, just taking that stuff and turning it on its head was kind of the hallmark of Warcraft in those days. Just hey, this is Tolkien-esque, but we're going to do our own thing with it. So I definitely had those same kind of feelings about those early games.
Well, and you have to consider how ahead of its time it was for even telling stories from the quote-unquote villain's perspective and making them relatable. I mean, it's something we talk about in modern film in the last 5 years in a really big way, where there's more and more films coming out, movies coming out, storytelling-wise, that are better, because they let you sort of empathize with where the villain or the quote unquote bad guy is coming from, and even in some ways understand what they're doing and why they're doing it and sympathize in those ways. Movies like Black Panther that came out recently, you could really see a very good job of that happening inside that storyline. So it's neat to sort of harken back to this level of storytelling where earlier on they're like, no, we don't want this to just be a, red versus blue or a very clear cut kind of world. We want it to be more of a real world, more of a real place where these different races and factions have different motivations and different draws to sort of pull them to each other and interact with each other in different ways. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that about it. When it comes down to World of Warcraft, though, since you were refreshing the page daily, I assume you were in there quite early on. Were you a beta or an alpha player of World of Warcraft?
I was a beta player of World of Warcraft. Yeah, I made it in. It took a while. It was pretty late in the beta before I made it in, but I got to experience like classes before talents existed for them. Like they just hadn't done them yet, or like the point where they just completely redid the paladin class like 2 months before release. Like just ripped the whole thing out, made it started over again. And then later did that another 30 times. That was kind of the story of the paladin class for a long time, was every time a release happens, paladins have been reworked.
Was that your first time experiencing like a beta environment for games and development like that?
No, I'd kind of made a hobby of playing betas of MMOs because there was just a ton of MMOs that were in development at the time. And because it was a space that they were like, people were still figuring out, people were still trying to understand. And this was kind of when the origination of the beta as a marketing gimmick started to really come around. Was this point where it's like, okay, we're going to have a beta for a game, but really it's because we want testing, but also really we just want people to get excited about this game. So we're going to let them play it for free for a little bit, and then they'll have a monthly fee for it later on. So I had beta tested a bunch of different MMOs, some of which came out, some of which came out and have been closed out since, some of which never came out. Like Asheron's Call 2 was one that I played a lot in beta, and then it came out and then it got shut down later on. But like City of Villains, City of Heroes, those were the games that I had beta tested also. So I'd kind of just gotten accustomed to the idea of playing something through a beta. And so that when I finally got into WoW, what was interesting to me about WoW was how like I remember playing a rogue and being like, wait, I don't have to sit around and drink water for 5 minutes in between every fight. Right. I just walk up, like as long as I've got health, I can just walk up to the next thing and stab it. What is this nonsense? Wait, the warrior generates things when it's fighting instead of losing things when it's fighting? What's going on here? So yeah, I don't know. That was a bit of a ramble, but that was one of the first things that when I started playing WoW, I was like, wow, this is really, really, for the time at least, very forward thinking. There had been some similarities. I'm trying to remember the order in which the original Guild Wars and WoW, I think they were being developed at the same time, but the original Guild Wars came out shortly afterwards. But there was that sort of like sense of, we don't have to just have everything be a mana bar and you're spending mana to use an ability, and then there's a 2.5 second global cooldown before you can use another ability. Like we can actually have slightly more responsive combat, and we can have, even for WoW at the time, it was significantly more responsive than other MMOs at the time. We can have classes that have different resources and different ways that they build and spend things and so on. It was very cool. It wasn't like WoW wasn't really the first game to do anything, but it was very good at taking like bits of ideas from lots of different spots and being like, what if we improve on this and we make this like a core feature here and so on.
Yeah, I mean, in those days too, just to kind of piggyback off of that, like WoW kind of had this, I don't know, this like rep. In the early days, it was like the Care Bear MMO, right? Like that's kind of the reputation it had because you didn't have an XP penalty or like a death penalty or anything. It had these sort of things that were really quality of life, essentially, like you're talking about with resource generation, eating and drinking in between every combat or whatever. I mean, that was more prevalent in vanilla than the game is now, obviously. Some classes maybe did sort of have that loop, but I mean, I remember playing like Star Wars Galaxies back in the day, and it's like, well, I engage in too much combat. I guess I better go back to town and hope there's a musician in the cantina so I can recover my health. Otherwise, it's going to be a long day. Right? Like, yeah, that was sort of the state of the genre at the time, and WoW was way more, it was more actiony, I think, than other MMOs of the time. And what you said about the responsive combat, I mean, it felt somewhat revolutionary. It was similar to like City of Heroes combat, I think, a little bit, and there was shades of anarchy for sure, but it was definitely more of an entry point, I think, for the genre for a lot of players at the time. And yeah, it did kind of have a little bit of a bad reputation as being like too easy to get into or like too player friendly, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it.
Yeah, it's so funny to me that nowadays, like, people look back at Classic and they're like, well, Classic, yeah, back when the game was hard and where everything, you had to earn everything and it was all difficult and it really was about who was going to put in the most effort and et cetera, et cetera. When that was like the biggest complaint about WoW at the time, was people were like, there's no effort in this game. It's too easy. Like, I remember, God, like, one of the things that sticks out to me about, or has always stuck out to me about Classic WoW as like the change that they made to this normal MMO formula that at the time everyone hated. Well, not everyone hated, but like it was very divisive at the time. Was that you didn't have to worry about failing trade skills. If you went to craft something, it just crafted. Whereas the standard in MMOs at the time was, you can craft this, you're going to use these materials, the materials will be gone, but you might fail, and thus the materials all get wasted and nothing has happened. And like that even extended to like Escheron's Call 2 I mentioned earlier was a game that I had played a lot of, and towards the like end game of that, you were able to get what was called a soulbound weapon, and you could only pick one of them, even though you could respec, but that was a whole different other thing. You'd only pick one of them, and it was the best weapon in the game for everything. Whatever spec it was you picked that for, or specialization that you picked that for, that was the best weapon in the game. But there was also, like, I forget what they called it, but it was their version of enchanting, which would theoretically make a weapon better. But if you failed it, it made the weapon worse. Oh. And you could only get one soulbound weapon. Oh. And so I got mine, and I was like, yes, I need to get somebody who can enchant it. And I really hope that it succeeds. And it didn't. So my best weapon in the game was worse than random other weapons permanently, with no way to resolve that. That was just how MMOs were at the time. And then WoW comes along and it's like, hey, but what if you didn't just randomly lose all of your progress? What if you didn't randomly just brick your character?
What if you have quests that like give you stuff to do and bring you around the zone in a directed manner? You know, what if we respected your time investment as a player? Yeah, it was different than a lot of the stuff that had kind of set the market. And I mean, I remember too at the time, like EverQuest was still kind of king of the hill, and it was like, well, they got 1 million subs. Like nobody's ever going to be able to top that. Like that's absurd. You know, how can you knock EQ off the mountain? But you know, everybody was trying to basically do that EQ thing and have their own twist on it, whether it was PvP or whatever. You know, what was that one game? There was like the 3 different factions. It was all about world PvP.
Dark Age of Camelot.
Yeah, Dark Age of Camelot. You know, all stuff like that. Everybody tried to carve out their niche of like, we're going to be EverQuest, but this. And WoW was just like, what if we take the stuff that is baked into the genre for the last 5 years that sucks and just threw it out the window?
We're going to be EverQuest, but fun.
Right, yeah. The magic ingredient. We'll just make it fun. We'll turn up the fun dial, and there you go.
The way I've always sort of talked about Blizzard games.
No offense, EverQuest players. I know many of you who love EQ out there. It was a moment in time for sure. We respect you. It wasn't my game.
I still remember talking to friends who were very serious into EverQuest, who would get phone calls at like 3 or 4 a.m., waking up their entire group to go and kill a boss that had popped up because the boss was up and they had to be the first group to get to it, otherwise the other group was going to get it. And that is not the seriousness that I wanted to play games back then. I did not want my raid leader calling me at 3:30 in the morning saying, please get up and get on your character because we need you to go and do this thing. That is not how I wanted to play my MMOs. But no, I've always described Blizzard games in general as being the more accessible games to get into, and that sort of like almost like their goal was, we want this to be a game that anyone can sort of step foot in and experience at least the storyline to sort of enjoy, you know, this experience and get through it. And it's interesting because you look at other developers out there like Riot, who's a developer that I feel very much designs games around, hey, this is our game. You either play it and enjoy it, or you don't. And, you know, you either are good at it, or you hit the mountain of people sort of commenting on your play style and you leave. You know, it was an interesting experience to sort of see that there's actually almost like a guide that developers make games around of how they want their games to be experienced for players. And Blizzard was one of my first experiences with that, because there were so many other companies out there that were putting out games that were just hard games. Like, here you are, here's just a hard game. Whereas Blizzard put out games, they're like, no, we'll ease you into this. We'll let you figure this out a little bit. It's not going to be super hard. Diablo was like the hardest game that they'd put out, kind of thing. And even then, if you just took it slow enough, you just outpower everything and eventually be able to work your way through the game. So I was enjoyed experiencing that with Blizzard's sort of motif that they did their games around. But I did want to ask, what was your first character that you hopped into in the WoW beta stuff? Do you remember what it was?
First character was a warrior.
Okay.
That was just because it was the one that popped up, and so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll try this and see what this is like. And that's when I was like, wait, I don't understand. Why is my mana bar empty? What's going on? Why can't I? How come I can use my spells even though my mana bar? Oh, I've got this. Oh, I'm generating a thing. I'm not spending a thing. That's interesting. Yeah, during beta, I played every class during beta, hopping around between the different ones, but none of them like very far. I think the farthest I got was a shaman, that I got to like level 12 or something. Other than that, I was just hopping around between different characters constantly, and basically getting to the point where I unlocked the talent tree if it was a class that had its talent tree in yet. And then I would look through what the options there were and then go play something else. I was also very bad at World of Warcraft at the time, it should be noted. So most of my time spent was running back to my corpse. Yeah. So there was a lot of, that looks like a group of things that I can fight over there. Huh, what are these weird frog creatures that are running at me? Oh God, why are there so many of them?
I picked a fight with one. Where did these other 6 come from? Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh no, not the Murlocs. Yeah.
Finally, I've killed all of them. That's fine. Lightning bolt from off screen. Die.
Yeah. Or my favorite is, finally I've killed all of them. You start looting them and then watch more start appearing near you, and you're like, okay, they're coming back. They're coming back. I've been here too long. I need to move on. I got to get out of here. Yeah. That was Murlocs back then. That was quite the experience. Okay, so you started out in beta primarily as warrior, but then you sort of played everything, so you sort of experienced everything. When the game launched, had you settled on something you wanted to sort of put your time in towards?
Yes, for a dumb reason in hindsight, but it worked out. So I had come off of running they were called allegiances in Asheron's Call 2. And I was like, that was cool. I liked being in charge of a group and figuring out like not just how to make things fun for myself, but figuring out what everybody else is up to and how do we make things fun for everyone and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, I want to run a guild. I want to be a guild master. And that's what I'm going to do. And so I thought to myself then, okay, what's the character that people would want to join their guild the most? So I was like, well, I can't be a cloth wearer because no one wants to follow a cloth wearer around. They want to be led into battle. So I eventually was like, should I be a shaman, or because shaman can wear mail eventually? No, I have to be a warrior. And I was horde, obviously. So I was like, all right, warrior it is. And I was even on top of that, I was like, okay, but I have to be a big warrior. So I was a Tauren warrior. I mean, that was why I chose that, was because I wanted to be a guild master, not because I was like, this is the gameplay that I want.
Yeah, I mean, that was the reasoning for a lot of people. It just really abstract what made sense to you at the time. I mean, for me, my first main character was a mage, and it was a mage because I asked the other 2 people who I wanted to play with what they were playing, and I was like, you know what? You don't have a mage, and a mage sounds fun because I can make portals and move us around quickly from place to place. So sure, I'll just do that because that sounds really useful. It had nothing to do with like the play style or the gameplay or me enjoying something about the class fantasy. It really was just like, hey, you know what? This utility is nice. I guess this utility is as rational as your thing.
Yeah.
It was interesting I hadn't even considered, like I played mage for quite a while, and I hadn't even considered like, oh, I should just try some other classes. It wasn't until Burning Crusade that I tried something else. I was like, I should just try some other classes because maybe I'll like the gameplay more. It was very much a one-track mind of like, this is what I chose. I'm just sticking with it now. This is the thing. Did you have alts and stuff during vanilla?
Yeah. So I bounced around a lot. I've always had severe alt-itis. I can't play the same character for too long. I always end up being like, this is fun, but wouldn't it be interesting if I did this as this other character instead? So I had my warrior, and then my warrior was my first character to max level. I bounced around on a lot of different characters in between. By the time Classic ended, I'd had warrior, priest, warlock, rogue, and hunter, I think, were all my max level characters.
Wow.
By the time Burning Crusade came out. And there was some like server hopping involved in that too. I actually had gotten a shaman nearly to max also during that period of time. There was a period of time. So back in those days, it was still fairly regular that a brand new server would come out because WoW was still growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. And they'd be like, well, we need to spin up a new server. So there was this period where I had gotten super burnt out on warrior because warrior was just really hard to play back then. If you've played WoW Classic nowadays and you've played a warrior and you've gotten to level 40, you understand the the pain of being a warrior in Classic. So I just was like really, really burnt out on warrior. And there was a group of people that had actually been playing Alliance on my server, but they were like, we're going to reroll Horde on this other server that's just coming out. And I was like, hey, that sounds like fun. So I went and rerolled Horde as Horde. I was just playing another Horde character, played a warlock. That ended up being my first real like raid experience. I'd been pulled in for a molten core as like an off tank on core hound packs on my warrior before, but that was as far as I'd gotten, was up to Magmadar. But then on my warlock, we ended up doing ZG, and we like did the whole raid leader thing. We were like, we got to push through here. We were not very good at all. We never made it to Hakar. We didn't even make it through most of the bosses, but it was my first, like, at least in WoW, my first, like, we have a scheduled night where everyone needs to log on and we need to go to this raid instance and we need to try and progress through it. After that, that group eventually sort of kind of fizzled out because we were in that like casual but wanting to be hardcore. So like some of us really wanted to be in there almost every night going hard on ZG. Some of us just really wanted to turn up, collect loot, log off. And for a group of that size at the time, that just did not work. So that group eventually fizzled out. I went back to my original server, finished leveling my priest, got to max, and one of the raiding guilds on that server, which I eventually became the guild master of many years later, was looking for priests because there weren't a lot of people playing priests back then. They were like, we need healers, we need priests. And I was like, okay, well, I've learned what downranking is, so I can out heal most priests that exist because everyone else is spamming max rank greater heal and going out of mana in 2 seconds. I'm over here with heal rank 3, just spamming that forever because I can. And so in greens, my first raid with wearing greens with this group was also our first Nefarian kill. So we were working our way through. It was funny too because they were using DKP and they had this weird DKP system at the time because people really wanted to save all of their DKP for the class, like for the class sets.
Yep.
For the set gear. But then that meant that they weren't picking up any other gear because they were trying to save DKP for the class drops when it happened.
Yep.
So I came in and just, they ended up with like 2 sets of DKP just for Blackwing Lair for some reason, where it was like class gear and cross class gear. but still no one was picking that stuff up. So I came in and literally like got fully geared over the course of that raid, like starting at the first boss and all the way through. I just kept getting loot like crazy. Ended up like minus 800 DKP or something like that. Like I was so far in the hole, I was never going to get any item that anyone else wanted ever.
Right.
But by the end of it, turned out if you understood priest mechanics at the time, a lot of the non-set gear was actually better because the set gear had spirit, non-set gear had mana per 5. Right. And you wanted mana per 5 because mana per 5 didn't care if you were casting or not. Mm-hmm. God, why do I remember this stuff and not like my friends' birthdays?
Yeah, there's
why is that the knowledge that I keep around?
there's like 3 things in here that I wanted to grab at. One of them was, what you're just talking about, mana per 5 and spirit. So spirit would only activate mana regeneration when you hadn't been casting for longer than 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. Then you would start kicking in that mana regeneration, whereas mana to 5 was just perpetual all of the time. So yes, that was a crazy mechanic back then for sure, and something that a lot of healers didn't know about managing. The other thing you mentioned, which I know some people probably grabbed or not, was downranking. That was another crazy thing during Classic, because all classes could benefit from it. Mages, even using lower rank Scorch, could just perpetually cast Scorch over and over and over again with it. So basically how spells worked inside early World of Warcraft, for those who might not have experienced it, is you would actually go to a trainer and they would teach you a higher rank of the spell that you have, but you'd maintain all of the earlier ranks. So when you opened your spell book, you would see that you had Fireball rank 1 through 8. That was like the whole thing. And each one would cost more mana. It would do more damage. The damage over time might increase. Similarly with healing, you'd heal over time might increase. It would cost more mana. The main initial heal would increase. That sort of thing with the different ranks. So Josh saying I was sitting there with, heal rank 3, greater heal rank 3, spamming it over and over again just means, he was using a spell that he might have learned when he was level 27 or something like that. But that would mean that, he was able to keep his mana regen higher than his healing drain would put on it. So he was able to just perpetually cast that over and over again because his mana per 5 would restore mana faster than he could spend it. But he was always able to heal. So as opposed to casting 4 big healing spells and being out of mana, he could perpetually cast healing spells, which just made him a better healer overall. So, downranking was a cool thing back then, man. And for people to figure out, I remember learning it for the first time, like, as you were talking about, Blackwing Lair was kind of the raid where I picked it up as well and was like, oh, this is, like, brilliant. Who figured this out of, putting 5 different ranks of a spell on my bar, the same spell, because depending on what situation I'm in, I want rank 1 so I can always be doing something, or I want, rank 5 for the start of the fight, but I want to be able to downrank after that. Like, it was a really weird concept to start looking at doing. Nowadays, the game obviously much more simplified, and you get 1 rank of spell, it costs X mana, will balance your class around that, and give you ways to recuperate mana in a better way. Or you just have to be more conscious of what your mana budget is, right? So it's...
Yeah.
It's very.
It is interesting, place. Like specifically when it comes to like downranking, they kind of ended up making that in a roundabout way. Ended up making that just be how healing worked by implementing like the lesser healing wave and healing wave sort of thing, or heal and greater heal as 2 different spells for a priest, which they were 2 different spells before, but like turned one of them into the highly efficient spell that you cast because you want to. You just want to have something to cast to keep going constantly and like top people off or whatever. The nature of healing has gotten a lot different nowadays just because of like boss design and like AoE healing became a lot more important as bosses started doing more raid damage and so on. It used to be literally like the tanks were what you cared about. And if anyone else took damage, toss a renew on them, hope they don't screw up again because there was no reason anyone else should ever be taking damage.
Yeah.
Up until like, literally, I remember getting to Cthulhu in Encourage, and all of a sudden, all of our healers had to remember how to heal other people than the tank because, like, that was the first fight where people would take big chunks of damage in the raid, and you had to heal them in case another I-beam hit them soon, and they would just die because the amount of damage was just higher than it had been before.
Yeah,
but yeah, I always thought it was a cool approach that they sort of looked at how people are playing the game, looked at, oh, here's a thing that people have discovered. okay, but it actually makes healing a lot more fun because you're not just cancel casting constantly. You actually want to be spamming spells, and that means you're getting to do something this whole time.
Yeah.
So they just implemented that essentially. It's never been quite as cool as downranking, in my opinion, just because there was that cool feeling of like, as you gear up more, like I remember when I started healing raids, I used heal rank 4, but as I geared up and I got more bonus healing on my gear, then I was like, ooh, now I can go to heal rank 3. And towards the end of the expansion, when we were in Nax, I was like, some fights I think I can actually use heal rank 2, and that's fine. And there's like even more mana efficient and so on. So there was that feeling of like almost end game progression from being able to use lower and lower spells. And that's like one aspect of it that kind of got lost, but that was such a niche thing that I don't know if it really matters.
Well, it's neat. You mentioned cancel casting, and I'll describe that one real quick too for folks, which is what healers used to do is load up a really big heal that would take 2.5, 3 seconds to cast, and they'd be, loaded up on their tank, and maybe another healer did that slightly before you did. And so you'd watch the tank's health spike back up to full health, and you would then hit escape or hit a macro or jump or whatever it was to cancel your cast. So you didn't waste the mana by throwing healing on a target that already had full health. And so there was this like almost disappointing, it's like launching a pyroblast at a mob that dies before the thing reaches it, right? It's the same feeling of like, oh, that was such a waste. I could have cast it on this other thing that we were fighting as opposed to this thing that just died while I cast it on it, right? So I certainly appreciate that disappointing feeling and finding a way to sort of move players away from it, which I think is great. So that's why I've always enjoyed mechanics like overhealing turns into a barrier, overhealing does something, spreads to people around a target or things like that. Because as a healer, it just never feels good to just be healing a target that's at full health all of the time. So yeah, it's an interesting game development aspect of trying to find ways to keep it fresh and keep it interesting for players, no matter what their role is in the game like that. Okay, jumping back into our sort of questions that we've sorted out here. You've now, joined raid teams. You've experienced a raid experience. You've played through Classic. What made you want to start actually contributing more to the community, creating things for the community? Where did you start with that?
I mean, it genuinely just kind of happened. So when Burning Crusade came out, they added Paladins to Horde. I guess Alliance got something too, but importantly, they added Paladins to Horde. And so I was like, okay, we're going to need somebody to level a Paladin. And I had just come off of leveling 5 characters to max and being like, okay, I feel like I can level pretty quickly at this point. So TBC came out. I spent like the first day playing my warrior. I was like, yeah, I'm going to level my warrior first, and then I'll level a Paladin. And I got like halfway through Hellfire Citadel, and I was like, or Hellfire Peninsula. And I was like, I'm not doing that a second time. I'm going to go level my Paladin now. I'm not going to finish this on this character, then have to do all this again. This is taking forever. I'm just going to go level my Paladin. So I started leveling my Paladin. This is also where the name Lore came from. That wasn't a name that I had ever used prior to that. But there was a meme at the time about how Paladins and Draenei, like Draenei were space Paladin, and they had like a space. They literally arrived to Azeroth on a spaceship, and everyone was like, "What the heck? This is crazy. This doesn't make any sense
in the fantasy game
of Warcraft." Yeah. What do you mean?
Sci-fi,
why are there? Yeah, why are there Protoss pylons being dropped by Draenei Shaman in my Warcraft game? And so the meme at the time was lore LOL. And so I decided to make a Blood Elf Paladin because that was what everyone was like laughing about. They were like, I can't believe that Blood Elves can be Paladins. This doesn't make any sense, because if you remember Blood Elves from Warcraft 3, like they were this very like dark magic sort of thing.
Wielding the light now as Paladins, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, this doesn't make any sense. There's no way that they could possibly explain this. Oh, never mind. They have a Naru chained up in the basement, but never mind. There's no way they could make any sense out of any of this. So I wanted to have a character that I could type /me, space LOL, just walk around memeing that constantly. So that was where the name Lore came from. My paladin was just named Lore so that I could lore, LOL in chat everywhere that I went, because I don't know, I'm a meme lord. So I started leveling that paladin. I forgot what the original question that I was starting to answer here was.
So it was, what made you sort of get into starting to contribute and give back to the community?
Yes. So I started leveling a paladin, and I was like, as I was leveling, my original plan had been, I'm going to go healing paladin, because like my main healing, or my main raiding character was still my priest at the time. So I was like, I'm going to go healing character. But as I continued leveling, for some reason, we ended up with a ton of healers at max level before I got to max, and like no tanks. So I was like, well, I'll try protection paladin. Why not? We'll see what prod is like. And I started to really like it. I was like, wow, this is actually interesting. Like, I've got Avenger's Shield. That's a fun spell to cast, and it bounces around on things. I've got the way Righteous Fury works is weird. The way that this taunt works is weird, but I can deal with it. We'll give this a shot and see what happens. So I ended up playing a Protection Paladin, and at the time, Protection Paladin was not very well understood by anyone, including Blizzard. So like there was this forum called Main Tankadin that I discovered from the official WoW forums. This was back in the days when the official WoW forums would let you link to other websites. So I found this forum called Main Tankadin, which was just a bunch of paladin tanks all trying to figure out, like, how can we not just be an off tank? How can we be an actual, like, proper main tank and everything? And what can we do to do that? And how can we best gear ourselves? Basically just a theory crafting community. Mm-hmm. So I started spending a lot of time over there, figuring out how does paladin work? How does this stuff all fit together? What's this mythical 102.4% avoidance that people really need so that they stop taking crushing blows, which were a thing at the time? Mm-hmm. And how do we get to that point? How do we math all of this out? What does resilience mean and all that? Like, figuring out how to, like, fit all this stuff together. Spending a lot of time there. As a result of both A, spending a lot of time there, and B, being the guild master and raid leader for I was only raid leader at the time, but being the raid leader for my group, I was able to just kind of put myself in the position of being one of the furthest progressed protection paladins. I don't know if we ever figured out exactly what order it all occurred in, but I think the one of the first 3 protection paladins to kill Illidan during Black Temple, which was super fun, and a difficult one to try to figure out how to tank on, but it was fine. So as a result of that, eventually, as protection paladins started to become more accepted as potentially actually a tank, and it's not just warriors for everything, prop paladins might be a thing, I started spending more time on a little site called Tank Spot that a guy named Ciderhelm ran. And he eventually was like, I want to do a Tank Spot podcast, but I would like a co-host. And I was like, well, I'm not a warrior, but I'd be a co-host if you want. And he was like, sure, let's do it. So that's just kind of how that came around. I started doing a podcast with Ciderhelm. Tank Spot then started to get into doing, like, raid encounter guides. And Ciderhelm was like, you want to help out with the encounter guides? I was like, yes. So I started doing encounter guides. We then figured out, like, okay, cool. The site makes enough money to support itself when a new raid comes out, but it kind of drops off and then becomes a money drain again when there hasn't been a raid in a little while. So people aren't watching the raid guides as much anymore. How do we fill in the gaps? And I was like, well, what if I just did like a vlog series where I just talk about random topics and so on? And that's how the Weekly Marmot came about. And it was all just literally like, it, at the time, felt like relatively minor decisions to be like, yeah, I could do this thing. That'll help. And that just grew and grew and grew and snowballed into getting heavily into content creation and like being one of the first streamers and all of that. So, man, kind of just right place, right time, right circles of people that I was talking to, and general inability to realize the implications of what I'm doing at the time.
Well, I think the biggest thing that stands out is your ability to say, sure, why not? And try something, right? When it came down to it. Because you were sort of presented with these opportunities to engage more, and you just kept taking them on and trying them. And when a challenge came up, you're like, sure, I'll try something different. So I think that really shines through as, something that you were willing to do that got you more consistently creating content, and at least involved more in content, which is great. So you grew from TankSpot, Weekly Marmot. We also know you got into Game Breaker, which eventually was legendary, obviously, with that podcast and that stuff going on. You were streaming your own content on Justin TV, turning into Twitch, and obviously partnership over there. Was there like a moment where you considered doing content creation as like your main gig? Like you stopped doing any other work and just did that?
Yeah. That did eventually become a thing. That was, I want to say it was shortly after the Weekly Marmot became a thing, was the point where I was able to say, because the job that I had at the time, I was IT manager for a different wheelchair accessible vehicles manufacturer. That industry is very funny, and you bounce around between companies a lot in that. But it just happened to be that like I'd gone to do something else for a little bit. Like literally my career path was like fast food, web development, fast food, web development, fast food, web development, online content creator. Like that was my career development. But yeah, I'd been like working that job for a while, and I'd been there for like 4 or 5 years, and I was just fed up with it. And it wasn't paying very well at all. And I kind of eventually realized like, okay, if I just really lean into this video stuff and I just make more videos, that's when I started coming out with the show I had called PST, which no one ever knew what that stood for. I didn't realize at the time that was a very old MMO reference, even for like the Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm era. It was please, said, and tell. And so it was a question and answer show. I was like, oh, I need this PST. It's clever. I'll call it that. And everyone was like, why did you name your show Pacific Standard Time? It's like, okay, I see how you got there, but that was not the point. But basically the point where I started doing that, I was being paid per video at that point. I realized, okay, they say the people that owned TankSpot at the time were like, yeah, sure, if you make more videos, we'll pay you for each of them at the same rate. And I was like, so I just make a ton of videos? All right, I'm making 3 videos a week now. It just worked out. So yeah, I did that. And then that was the point where I was like, okay, I'm now a full-time content creator. Which was very funny at the time. I remember, so I started renting a house off of my brother, and it was in this really nice like suburban area, with the sort of place where in like the mid 2000s, late 2000, I don't remember, around the 2010 era, where you have neighbors that come over and just talk to you sometimes still, like that sort of like environment. So we had neighbors that came over and just talked to us, and I am convinced they thought I was like a drug dealer or something, because they never saw me awake before like 5 p.m. and I would only ever like actually leave the house when it was dark out. And so they kept coming over. They'd be like, so what? Like they asked me what I did for a living like 5 or 6 times. And like telling someone I make videos on the internet and people pay me for it had different connotations at the time as well.
Yes, it did.
So I didn't want to be like, yeah, I make internet videos and people watch them, because that would genuinely probably have been worse for my reputation than being a drug dealer. Probably. So I just went, oh, I'm in online broadcasting. That works. It's like TV, but on the internet, and they seem to accept that. But yeah, did that for a while, and it was fun. I liked it. I was enjoying it a lot.
Right. I mean, this was like a kind of a different universe from the one we're in today. Like the stuff has come so far, so fast in the last like 15 years. I mean, you were one of the guys that was sort of on, the forefront of all that stuff, just, you know, as it worked out. I mean, I remember for myself, like watching Tank Spot videos and stuff. That was the first time I had ever searched out any kind of content like that in my life. And I mean, I'm an elder millennial at the absolute youngest. I might be the youngest Gen Xer alive. You know what I mean? Like I'm not a young guy. I've been on the internet since the mid 90s. You know, I've been into video games since I was 3 years old or whatever. Somebody sat me up in front of a ColecoVision in the living room or whatever. And like, that was the first time I was ever like, oh, wow. Like, people are really making like very specific, like very tailored stuff around this game. Like, they're sharing their gameplay experiences. They're trying to provide like tips in a way that you could digest visually, which had never, we didn't have the internet technology really to disseminate that before then. So
yeah, it came from the companies themselves putting out magazines that would give you articles where people at the company had written something. You weren't getting it from other players all that often outside of like a forum based thing.
Or like reading an FAQ and hoping you decipher what the author is trying to impart upon you. And, you know, like I remember watching your videos for Tank Spot and stuff back then. That was among the first, you know, videos I ever saw where it was like, oh yeah, this is like a real dive into this specific thing I'm interested in. I want to know how this boss works or whatever. And like, what was it like, I guess, kind of being at the forefront of it and watching how the whole kind of landscape has sort of exploded over the years. I mean, now there's so many different outlets for that, but once upon a time, nobody was doing that. Like, you were among the first people to do it.
Yeah, it's always interesting to look back on all of that, and like just remembering things about those early days, because at the time it was very clearly like we are using all these different tools to make a thing work that none of these tools were designed for. Like, streaming back then was, you had an app that, if you even got to the point of being able to use multiple scenes, there was an app called Multicam that people used. And then you would set up virtual cameras inside of that, and then use Multicam would then output itself as a virtual camera. And that was an app that someone had made for, I don't know what purpose originally, but it wasn't designed for streaming video games. And then you would have things like Fraps or, God, what was the other one? There was another just video capture thing that people were using at the time. All of that worked together and then got fed into Adobe Media Encoder, which you would trick into thinking that it was sending rendering to, instead of a file, you would trick it into sending the stuff it was rendering in real time to a website. And then the website would take that information, and that was how Justin worked. So it was this crazy thing where it was like, okay, we're just figuring out how to make all this stuff work. And I don't think anyone at the time really, well, okay, I won't say that. I don't think most of us at the time really thought like, yeah, one day this will be something that people pay people millions of dollars to play a video game. Like, that was just a crazy, ridiculous thought that wasn't occurring to any of us at the time. It was just, this is a fun hobby. Like, this is fun. This is cool. I like it. Maybe eventually I can figure out how to make some money off of this. But at the time, it was all hoping that, because YouTube didn't allow ads on video game content at the time. So unless you were part of an MCN, which is I forget what it stands for exactly, a creator network, that then would take some of you, like literally the role of an MCN was to have the ability to turn on monetization on your channel, and then they would just take half of that. So you did all the work and they just clicked a button, but that's how they made money. And that's how you made money back then, was because you had to sign yourself to one of these to even have ads on your gaming content. The moment where YouTube decided to allow ads on gaming content basically destroyed the MCN industry entirely, which good, because most of them were just kind of trash. But anyway, yeah, at the time it was just, this is a fun thing to do that I enjoy doing, kind of like playing WoW all the time was a fun thing to do that I just enjoyed doing. So it wasn't until Twitch's partner program that the streaming especially started to feel like something that you could monetize. And even then, it was just ad revenue back then. I'll be honest, ad revenue back then and ad revenue today are about the same. It's not changed dramatically, at least in terms of the amount that the creator gets. So it was like, yeah, I'm going to stream 400 hours this month. I'll get like $50 for it. It's whatever. Like, I'm never going to make a career out of that. which is funny in a like alternate history sort of way, because the biggest reason that I applied to Blizzard was because I was looking at Twitch and I was looking at YouTube, and I was like, it's cool that I can make money off of this, but I'm turning 30 and I'm not going to be able to have a career in this. Like, I'll never retire on this money. Spoilers. Good job. As every millennial also knows, you're not going to retire anyway. Thanks the economy. But like at the time I was like, there's no way that I can turn this into a long-term career in its current state. And it's taking too long for other things to happen. Literally 2 months after I started at Blizzard was when Twitch was like, and now all partners can have a subscription button, and just completely changed how monetization worked in the streaming industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I always look back at that and go, if I just waited another 2 months, maybe my career would have taken a completely different path. But here's where I am now, and I enjoy it. So yeah.
Oh. Yeah, so I mean, you hinted at it while you were talking about there, as far as the decision to actually join the Blizzard team working on World of Warcraft at some point. Obviously, that was a leap for you, and obviously it was about stability, is what you were sort of thinking about, and your future goals and career goals. But that must have also just been like, on the geek level, super exciting and crazy and thrilling to get to peek behind the curtain and essentially be a part of that team. Like, what was that process like for you from application to joining in?
Yeah, it was interesting because like it really was I did the application as like we'll see if this comes through or not. I'm not gonna worry about it too much. I'm just gonna see if we'll see what happens. I saw they had a job posting. I found out later that they had written that job posting hoping that I would apply to it.
Oh,
I don't know why they didn't just ask me.
You?
They had written the job because it was like, we need someone with a strong connection to the World of Warcraft community and also knows how to make videos. And like, I guess like they had just tossed that idea together, and they were like, it'd be cool if someone like Josh applied for this. And then I applied for it, and it was like, okay, cool, this worked out.
This also involves you moving, right? Like where were you living at the time that you moved down to California?
I was in Michigan at the time, and then I moved out here to California. But yeah, it was a big life change. Like there was a lot that was going on in my life just in general at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I just kind of, I put the application in. I then started hearing back. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then they flew me out to have like a proper in-person interview. And I was like, this is neat. Yeah, this is fun. I'm enjoying the ride, really. I don't know. It's just kind of the story of my life, is me just sort of like bumbling my way through figuring out what I'm doing next. And then the next thing is always a little bit cooler than whatever I was doing before. But yeah, it was genuinely something. So the interesting bit of trivia about that. So the main Tank It In site that I mentioned a while ago, is where I sort of first started getting into all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest reasons that I look to that as where I got started is I had also applied to a job, to a community manager job at Blizzard back then. I believe that was the one that Bornak ended up getting the position at the time. My application was awful. Like it was, I did one of those like, this is my resume. It's 8 pages long and contains every single piece of trivia that could ever possibly be connected to World of Warcraft. And like I included in my resume that I had beaten the Warcraft 2 demo using nothing but peons. Like,
yeah,
this is not information that was important to include in a resume, but I didn't know any better at the time because I was still in your 20s. Yeah.
Standard 20 something person resume. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. But as part of that, I was like, okay, I've listed that I'm doing stuff at Main Tank It In like 12 times on here. So I should act on Main Tank It In like I think a community manager would act. And by virtue of just acting like that, I then became the global moderator on the Main Tank It In forum. And that like just helped build that like mentality and that persona and that like approach to community development by just thinking to myself, how would a community manager do all of this? So I had applied to Blizzard back then, didn't get that job. And then several years later, applied again, just as like, hey, we'll see what happens this time. And that was when it actually came through. So, yeah.
So you are uprooting your life. You're moving to California. You're going to be working with a group of people who you probably know, some of which from the forums or something like that, but you've probably not had a lot of conversation with. Or was there people there, devs and people there that you've actually like? Have you gone to a BlizzCon or met up with any of them before? Or
yeah, I'd been to BlizzCons before and met up with some of them. Probably the one person that I knew the most at Blizzard at the time, and this wasn't like we weren't like best of friends or anything, just like the person that I had talked to the most was actually Ghostcrawler, Greg Street, because he took a lot of interest in Tank Spot. And he was really excited about like the video guides and everything, and really sort of helped champion us internally at Blizzard as like, no, this is good. This is good that people are making videos on how to complete these raid encounters, because we want more people doing the raid encounters, because otherwise we're spending a lot of effort on creating raid encounters for like 20 people. So
yeah.
we need this to become a more widespread thing that more and more people are able to participate in. So we'd talked with him a little bit, and I'd met up with him at a BlizzCon before and chatted with him for a little bit. They had invited me out to Blizzard campus at one point. I remember this was when I first met Greg. We were sitting in the Blizzard cafe, and I was talking to the person next to me about Tank Spot, and I'm Lore from Tank Spot. This is blah 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 blah. And Greg just like drops the conversation he was having with someone else, turns over to me and says, "Wait, you're Lore from Tank Spot?" And I was like, "Oh God, he knows who I am." It was really, really like one of those, "Oh God, I'm actually kind of doing a thing, aren't I?" moments. But yeah, I started at Blizzard. I'd talked to some of the community managers before, mostly Bashiak Minka. Was the one that I had talked to the most. He hasn't been at Blizzard for a while now, but I'd talked to him a bunch, a little bit with God, what was Zarim, who was John. I talked with him a little bit in the past as well, but for the most part, it was kind of like, here's all these people that you know of, but you don't necessarily know. Now work with them and do things and so on. And I was very fortunate in that that the time when I came in was right on that cusp of when Blizzard started to transition from and like the industry in general started to transition from your community managers should just be people who are passionate about the community and figure out the rest later on. But community management has just kind of started to mature right as I was joining the industry, to the point where it eventually became the case that like if you were a big AAA company, you were looking for people who had prior community management experience. And if you wanted to, like nowadays, if you want to get into community management, you probably need to start at a much smaller company and build your way up to that, instead of what I did, which was just YOLO, like go straight into it, because the industry was just less established at the time, and there wasn't the ability for those companies to be like, let's find someone with 5 years of community management experience, because no one had 5 years of community management experience. So
right, so you joined this team. Where was World of Warcraft at this point? Were you in Burning Crusade? Were you in Wrath?
End of Mists of Pandaria was when I started.
Okay, there it is.
At Blizzard. Yeah.
Okay, so we were farther along. So you were end of Mists of Pandaria, and you jumped in. So you I
joined Blizzard, and one of the first conversations I had once I was under NDA was, yeah, so by the way, our next expansion, it wasn't named yet, but it was like, it's going to be Warlords of Draenor, and we're going to do this weird time travel thing. And I was like, okay, this is
welcome aboard. People are going to love this.
To learn, okay.
Well, you thought they hated the space goat alien blood elf paladins. Just you wait.
Like, yeah. I literally, when the person who told me this was telling it to me, I thought they were trolling. Like, I just literally went, "Ha, that's hilarious." And he was like, "No, that's actually the next expansion." I was like, "What?"
Yeah, man, starting to peek behind the curtain. So what tasks were you taking care of when you first sort of started there as this?
Yeah. Initially, like, I just kind of settled into guy who talks on the forums role, like what we would call like community engagement nowadays. But mostly I ended up spending a lot of my time specifically in like the PTR forums and the beta forums, and just as it worked out, ended up spending a lot of my time like gathering feedback from posters and being like, okay, here's what the hunters are upset about right now. And then I would go to Greg and be like, Greg, hunters really hate this change that you made. And he'd be like, okay, well, we're going to make a different change next week anyway, so tell them to sit tight. And then I'd go and be like, okay, sit tight. They're going to make a different change. And the hunters would be like, hooray, thank you so much for listening and doing something different. And then they would hate the new change even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come back and they're like, you said it was going to be better. And I was like, I thought it was going to be better.
Yep. Yes, you just described the early parts of your career there quite well. And you obviously community management there changed and your role changed over time, and different people sort of cycled in on the different teams, but you ended up in a position where you started basically sitting down with Ian pretty regularly to have Q&As. And so what was it like sort of becoming part of the quote unquote Blizzard family, if you will, and then I guess moving into a point where you're actually sitting down with, like, you know, the head of the game basically for World of Warcraft?
Yeah. So I guess it's interesting to hear you describe it that way, because my experience was very different. To me, that moment where we started doing the Q&As was just like Ian and I were chatting one day and thought, hey, this could be a cool thing to do. And so we were just like, yeah, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And we tried one, and it was like, okay, that actually went pretty well. Let's figure out how to make that like a regular thing that we do on a regular basis, sometimes with people other than Ian. It eventually ended up being just Ian all the time, because like that was the most efficient way for us to answer as many questions as possible. Because he was at least in a position where if he had to make something up on the fly in response to a question, like that would stick, because he was the one who made those decisions. Yes. So he was able to go like, okay, yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. Maybe we'll do this. So then we ended up with devs watching the live Q&As to figure out what their next task was going to be. It's like, okay, we have to watch this to find out what decisions Ian's going to have to make on the fly, which wasn't a great situation to end up with. There's actually a lot of things that I learned from the Q&As that they were something that people enjoyed, and they were something that people liked the concept of, but I don't think we were ever able to completely deliver on that concept. Just because like the experience of watching a live Q&A was you sit there through 30 questions that are not what you want the answer to, hoping that eventually we get around to answering whatever your burning question was.
Right.
And so like these were in the days where like the Goblin and Worgen models hadn't been updated in ages, and every Q&A we got asked the question of like, when are you going to update the Goblin and Worgen models? And I'm like, I'm not going to put a we don't have anything to share about that answer in every single live Q&A. That's just a waste of everyone's time. But then those people in turn felt like they were being ignored, and there's a lot of interesting like ramifications and repercussions from that, which was part of why we eventually stopped doing them. The idea had been to like pivot that into a different sort of concept, which has now eventually that concept now lives on with the podcast that they've been putting out now that Linksay's been doing. And she's doing an amazing job on those. Those are great. That was kind of where that concept came from, was like, okay, we've determined that just straight up taking questions is cool for the like 30 people whose question gets answered, and really frustrating for the like 1,000 people who submitted a question and we don't get to it. So we're in terms of like number of people who appreciate this, it's actually kind of trending more towards people being upset than people being happy about it. So maybe instead of soliciting for questions, we just come with a list of topics of things that we're ready and prepared and excited to talk about. And that can be informed by questions that people are asking in the community, but it's a blah blah. And now I'm getting completely into the weeds, but yeah.
So
I mean, for us, like, I just want to jump in on that for a second because, like,
I'll bounce back.
I mean, I remember when you were doing those regularly. Like, I always loved those streams because I'm just a process nerd, and I was always fascinated with how WoW got put together and sort of the direction it was going. And we would cover every single one on the show. You know, we would go over whatever was interesting. We'd run down the whole list of questions, and like we'd cut some stuff here and there. And you know, over time, we did kind of notice that, like, okay, there's like a lot of repeat questions. There's stuff that the WoW community just cannot let go of. If you were still doing them, you'd be getting questions about why is Sword still in Silithus every single month? You know what I mean? Like, it's just the way it's the way that WoW players are. There's things that we kind of fixate on, and you know, there's always that kind of that thing that's stuck in somebody's craw that's never going to go away or isn't going to go away for 8 more years or whatever. So yeah, I mean, over time it was sort of, you could sort of see the momentum had kind of gone away because you are dealing with, you know, you're making an effort to actually engage with the community and field their questions, and you are going to end up getting a lot of retreads and repeat questions and stuff you can't really talk about on a regular basis, which must have been kind of a frustrating part of assembling them. But it was, you know, for what we do and just as a player and as somebody who's interested in the game, it was great to be able to get some insights from the boss, you know, and also from some of the other devs you had on about sort of what their job entailed or how they approached a certain thing that they stood up for the game. Like, that was something that, you know, it was kind of unthinkable at one point coming out of Blizzard, right? Is like, we're going to have this kind of level of visibility and interaction with devs in the game and about like what's happening, where's it's going.
At that frequency was the thing, right? So we'd get that interaction, but we get it once every year at BlizzCon. And then you wouldn't hear from them very much outside of that. But every month having this happen, that definitely made a big difference as far as that level of content goes. What I wanted to bounce back to there is, you mentioned you didn't really see it that way. You were just in a hallway having a conversation with Ian. And from someone who's works currently corporate based stuff and has for a decade, there are work environments where, you know, you don't have access to certain people without going through certain people, or it's not common for you to be able to just go up and talk to someone like that. Did you really feel like with the WoW team, you just had access to whoever you need to talk to? You could go around and chat with folk?
I always felt like there was someone on the team that I could do that with. I will say, like, the dynamic shift, the different people and different game directors and so on have different approaches to how they do things. Ian was very, like, wanted to be hands-on with the community, wanted to be, like, deeply involved in everything, really, like, passionate about immersing himself into that, because he felt like for his approach and the way that he wants to do things, it was important for him to be surrounded by that, like, environment all the time. Tom was very different. Tom was, when Tom Chilton was still game director, he wanted to take the approach of, we have this vision, I have this idea, we have this plan, I want to try to accomplish this plan, and there will be people on the team whose responsibility then is to point out where that plan doesn't match up with community expectations. So it's all still being accounted for, just a different working process. Mm-hmm. So Tom and I had like maybe 10 conversations directly, because I was usually working through somebody else like Greg or, in fact, Ian. So that's kind of when I started to build that relationship with Ian, was when he was still just the lead encounter designer. And we would talk a lot about raid stuff, and we would talk a lot. I would talk to Greg and Ian about, like, okay, here's this raid that's going on, and this is why people are upset. It's because monks suck on all of the fights in this entire raid instance or something, like Siege of Orgrimmar. Was it Siege of Orgrimmar? I don't remember which raid instance. There was one where it's like, okay, everyone has a fight that they can do something cool in, except for monks, and monks just don't ever have anything interesting that they can do through this whole raid. And I remember having that conversation with the both of them, and that was like often what the nature of those conversations were. And Tom was very much like, no, I have to be in leads meetings all day. I need to be able to focus on planning and thinking about 2 or 3 expansions ahead. Ian's just kind of a workaholic also. Like, he will still do all of that stuff, but then also spend a ton of his time like talking and focusing on community and so on. Different approaches, different positives and negatives to them. I don't, like, this isn't me trying to say like, yeah, Ian's just categorically a better game director. I think he's a very good game director. But the difference in approach between Ian and Tom is literally just how they personally decided to run things. But to answer your question, yes, I always felt like there were people on the team that I could go and talk to about all this stuff. There wasn't ever a point where I felt like, man, I really just can't. There's this thing that players are upset about, and I just can't go to the team about it because they don't care, or they don't want to listen to me, or they're just generally inaccessible. That was never an occurrence. It was always somebody on the team in a senior enough position to have an impact that I could go and talk to about whatever it was I needed to get across.
Great. I it's just important to understand the dynamic that you're working in. I definitely agree about the different leaders having different ways of leading, and it's not necessarily one's better than the other. They all have their own differences and benefits to them. Yeah. So no, I actually, it was neat to hear that about Tom, because I can appreciate that form of leading of, I have a vision, we're going to accomplish the vision. And yes, if tweaks need to happen along the way, there's a process for adjusting that, as opposed to having a bunch of people come up to you every day and chat with you. But I can also appreciate Ian's diving in and being in the trenches more often, is what it sort of sounds like, wanting to be a part of that, that sort of every tier of what's going on with the game and what's going on with the community. So very neat. So, okay, something we didn't talk about when you joined Blizzard is you had to give up some of the content creation you were doing. This is just one of those decisions that has to be made. I know, Mick Montgomery, who used to actually do Starting Zone a long time ago, had to give up Starting Zone when he went to go work at Riot. That was just a decision he had to do. Did you come to a point where you felt like there was enough training or trust with Blizzard that you were able to start doing content things again and being involved in forward-facing stuff?
So what's really interesting about that, so when I started at Blizzard, I know I was talking to them and going through the hiring process and everything. It was pretty clear that I would need to stop doing the weekly marmot and like the straight up commentary for multiple reasons. One being like they kind of didn't want me to, but honestly, genuinely, I wouldn't have wanted to, even if they were okay with it, because the idea of me speculating about what the future of World of Warcraft might be as someone who is working on World of Warcraft is a bit weird. Like I genuinely would not have been capable of producing that same content anymore, because I wouldn't be able to just sit there and be like, I wonder if this is what they mean, or I wonder if that's what they mean. Like I remember the example that comes to mind for me when I think through that is there was an episode of the Weekly Marmot where I literally just predicted what Raid Finder was going to be and what LFR was going to be, based off of like the way 2 or 3 messages and posts were phrased, where one of the community, I think it was Zarum, had said something about like, well, we're thinking about having a method for people to experience the content but probably not get as good of gear or something like that. And at the time people were like, what could that possibly mean? And I was like, here's my idea on what I think they might be talking about, and laid out what Raid Finder was. And then later people were like, so who at Blizzard told you about Raid Finder? I was like, no one. I just guessed. Like I literally just was like, this seems like what it probably is. Would not have been able to do that once I was actually at the company, because then like people will read, even if I don't actually know, people would read into it too much.
Yeah.
I had to be pretty careful. Even once I was eventually streaming WoW again, I had to be really careful about how I phrased things whenever people came in and started asking questions. Cause I was like, look, I know you're not going to believe that I don't know what this quest is going to turn into, or I know that you don't believe that I don't know what the next raid instance is, but I don't. Yeah. So, but yeah, as time went on, so the other interesting thing about that is when I started at Blizzard, like that was one of the first things I asked was like, when can I start streaming again? Because I like had just genuinely come to that point where, and I'm still someone who half the time I'm playing a video game, I feel like I'm wasting my time if I'm not streaming. And not necessarily from a like, I have to be doing the grind and getting the followers and getting the subscribers perspective and everything, but more just like whenever I'm playing a video game and something cool happens and I'm not streaming, I feel like I have wasted that moment, because like I'm not getting to share that moment with other people.
Yeah.
And that's just how I play games nowadays. Is every once in a while I'll take a game, I'll be like, nope, this one's just for me, and I'm just going to play this by myself. Like Frostpunk was one that I did that with recently, where I was like, I'm just going to play Frostpunk, and it's just for me. I'm not going to stream it. I'm just going to take a gamer mental health break and play this by myself. But like if I'm playing any other game and I'm like, oh man, that was really super cool. Wish I'd been streaming so that I could share that moment with other people and we could have that like community moment. Like that's how I feel. So I was really wanting to get back into streaming, and that pretty quickly resulted in me being one of the people who then helped develop and help develop a policy and train all of Blizzard on that policy for how to approach streaming and how to handle things like FTC guidelines, how to avoid situations in which someone traps you in a corner with a question because they're like, hey, what's this code name? And you say, well, I can't talk about that code name. Okay, now you've confirmed
it
that that's a thing. Yeah. So I was one of the people who trained. We did like multiple training sessions over the years at Blizzard, and I was one of the people that headed that up. So I was able to get back into it eventually just by virtue of developing the process by which to get back into it.
Very neat. No, I was curious because I know you did start creating content again while you were still working there. So it's one of those tricky situations about how the system developed. I like hearing that you were one of the ones on the inside training others about how that works. I think that's a pretty cool career step and moving in that direction. Because often what Jason and I, for our process, have is if we want to actually interview someone, we have to be sure they've actually been press trained. So they actually have to go through press training before we can actually speak with them. Simply because they got same thing. Like you don't know what kind of questions we're going to throw at people. We're very careful with our questions. We don't like asking people questions that they can't answer. I think in general, as you sort of mentioned with doing your Ian content when you were there, the Q&As with him, there's no point in throwing a question at someone that the answer is just going to be, I can't talk about that right now, or there's just no point. So when we curate our questions, we try to make sure they're ones that people can actually share something from and learn something from, which then saves the time and saves everyone's time, which I think is really nice. So,
well, that's why I always really enjoyed the approach of, which I know you guys have been through because we've worked together on doing dev interviews when I was still at Blizzard, but the approach of like, can you get me a list of topics that you want to talk about? This isn't because I'm going to ask you not to talk about any of those topics, but because I want to make sure that the person you're about to interview has an answer to those questions and can talk to those topics. Because it's like, if you go into an interview with Morgan or somebody and you're like, hey, so what about this random niche thing that wasn't on the top of anyone else's mind, but was a big like sticking thing for your community or something? And he has to go, oh, I haven't really thought about that in a while. I'll have to talk to the team and get back to you. Like, that's a super disappointing answer. So having the ability in advance to be like, okay, Morgan, they're going to ask you about the chuckle stump, and you need to be ready to talk about the chuckle stump. I don't know why that was the term that came to mind.
New toy coming next expansion.
Yes, exactly. They need to be able to talk about that. Then he would be able to go, okay, let me go talk to the developer who designed the chuckle stump, and so they can understand better what the heck a chuckle stump is and why it's something that people care about and what this issue is, etc. So
yeah, we've done interviews with everyone from people on the art team, people on the engineering team, game designers, encounter designers. And asking someone who works on the engineering team about an art question is just something you're not going to get a good answer to, right? So it's neat to curate and push questions towards that direction. So we definitely appreciate the team when they can actually get our answers to us. So we try our best to make sure that happens the way it needs to. All right. So as far as working at Blizzard, we'll start with that. What was like a moment for you that really stood out as a really cool, amazing, phenomenal moment that you'd want to highlight, if there was one?
Man, there's definitely a lot. Like doing the first live Q&As is one of them. Getting into, for a while I was doing arena commentary and like got to travel a whole bunch. Like we went to Prague for the arena championships in 2015, and so I got to just hang out in Prague and have the best bread I've ever had in my life, and like also get incredibly sick, which may have tempered my taste buds to where the bread was the best bread that I've ever had in my life. But like I got to do a whole bunch of cool stuff. But like when you started talking about that, the thought that immediately came to mind was actually after I'd been at Blizzard for like 4 or 5 years already. One day I was just like, I went and I parked my car and I was walking up to the office and I just kind of looked up and saw the big Blizzard Entertainment up the side of the building and just had that moment once again of just like, damn, I really work here. This is really what I do. Like, this is actually my office that I get to go into and work at. And that feeling of like one of the companies that was creating things that I had loved since I was very young, getting to like participate in that and like contribute in my own way to the longevity of it and the continued development of more stuff, and knowing that there were going to be people who currently were in the position where I was all those years ago, and like people coming up and say, oh man, I love World of Warcraft. I first played it in Battle for Azeroth or something when I was a kid, which wasn't that long. I'm going to pretend that wasn't that long ago. I actually know that Battle for Azeroth was like 5 years ago now. But anyway, yeah. I'm going to pretend it was like the most recent expansion. But like going through that and be like, yeah, I first played in Battle for Azeroth and I used to play with my dad, and then we really started to like, he got me my own account so that we could play together and blah, blah. And like hearing those stories and be like, dang, I got to be part of how someone else's path took a similar path to my own, and how someone else was able to get into gaming and get into understanding this stuff that I'm passionate about. And like just that moment of, I actually get to be part of this. It was really, really cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's that feeling that most people who end up with getting to work at a place that impacted them so much growing up, it gets to feel like that is special. So thank you for sharing that for sure.
Damn.
I mean, one thing I want to touch on about Blizzard before we kind of move on from there, because even that's ancient history now, right? But like, I guess your last role or one of your last main responsibilities when you were there was creator relations. And I mean, in my experience, you took a much different approach to that than maybe some of your predecessors had. And you know, what was that like? I guess like, okay, this is clearly a role that was, you know, like you were kind of cut out for, right? Having come up through that whole thing and innovating a lot in that space to begin with before you even worked there. And then, you know, part of your job responsibilities or your main job duty really is going to be to, you know, support people who are talking about the game and producing this stuff and this essentially like PR around the game. Can you talk about how that kind of came about and what that whole kind of process was like, and sort of coming full circle from the days of doing, you know, your own stuff and kind of accidentally falling kind of ass backwards into doing WoW content, and then you're like the main touch point for people who do that on whatever scale and level that they're doing it at.
Yeah, no, it was interesting that it took me that long to get into working with content creators. And that was entirely just because we had other people that were already doing that job. It wasn't a job that needed another person on it, and I wasn't going to replace somebody else. But what happened was in 2018, there was a big wave of layoffs at Blizzard, and that included the entirety of the team that had previously been working with content creators. Because I'm not going to go into too much of the detail behind it, but like the teams were relatively separated, or the team that I was on was relatively separated from the team that was doing that at the time. That was the team that was hitting the layoffs. My team was not. But as a result, then my team needed to take on the responsibilities and make sure that those tasks were being accomplished. And it was funny because like we were sitting there, we were talking through all of this stuff, and we're like, okay, who's going to handle this thing? Who's going to handle social media? Who's going to handle all this other stuff? And there was never the question at all about who was going to do content creator stuff. It was just literally like, and Josh will do content creators. Okay, next topic, moving on. And I was like, yeah, that tracks actually. Like I already know so many of these people just because we're friends from like having done this stuff together as content creators back in the day. And then also meeting other people as friends through those friends. So like I already know a whole ton of the WoW content creators. it just makes sense for me to take this on. And it was a really interesting opportunity for me to step in and be like, okay, I know how content creator relationships have been handled. I know how these relations have been done, but I also really, I had that good, solid understanding of what is the most helpful and beneficial to content creators, which it's easy to say, yeah, give them interviews, give them like exclusives, give them access to alphas and stuff early on. Like that's just kind of what I would consider table stakes, essentially. Like this is just the stuff that you do that. That's correct. These are the accurate. It's accurate to say that that's valuable, but the way in which you do it can be so like, okay. Here's an example. Normally for like a press junket, you will contact like 12 press outlets, 12 website, however many, 20, 30, 100 press outlets. And you'll be like, okay, we're going to do a press junket. There's going to be interviews available. Because now is the time that we want all of the press to be talking about our game. It's important because you know they're going to go off and they're going to cover other games in the meantime. So, but now is when it's important that every press website, every magazine, etc., is talking about our game. So you do them all at once. And I would take opportunities where I could to get content creators involved in those. But the difference between a content creator doing an interview and a press site doing an interview is the content creator is going to still be covering your game in the meantime. Like the starting zone is still going to be talking about World of Warcraft in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, a year, etc. So whereas in the past, it had always been like, okay, we have a press junket coming up. Let's involve a bunch of content creators as best we can. I would still do that just because it was an easy way to like get content creators involved. But then making sure like, okay, but let's also do some stuff that we space out. Because when every content creator gets the interview at the same time, it's less valuable for each individual content creator. Whereas when it's like, okay, we'll do an interview with a starting zone. We'll do an interview with Sloot. We'll do an interview with Bellular. We'll do an interview with whoever else. And we space those out over time so that, yes, the one content creator gets the like exclusive or whatever, but then all the other content creators can then cover it as well. It creates like the opportunity for content for everyone. It kind of allowed the sort of drawing of attention towards the one content creator, especially when it's like someone that we were like, okay, we really want more people to be aware that this like podcast exists or whatever. So because they're great and the tone that they bring towards the game is excellent and the audience that they hit is filling a niche that isn't hit elsewhere, etc. Let's make sure that we do something for these guys, and then other people will cover it and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but it was the opportunity to step in and be like, okay, let's understand a bit better the direct impact on the content creator from doing these things, and then figure out how to do them in a way that leans into that instead of just being like, well, how does a press site handle this? Let's just treat content creators like press. Like there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences as well.
Yeah, understanding that when you give, say, the starting zone an interview, and we do that interview and we put that interview out there, that you then have a large variety of other content creators who watch what we've put out and reboost that content by creating their own content about the now watching of a video content that's been happening out there lately, where people review is like popular. It happens all the time. And if you do that where you stagger it out over 3 or 4 weeks, then you almost create like a storm of content, because you're sort of building it up every single week where, more and more new things are happening and content creators have more and more content to generate. So it's a neat way to follow it, because something I did find very much with BlizzCons is you have that 2-day window where a ton of stuff is released and happens, but 2 weeks after it, there's not more interviews and stuff happening with it. It's that is the 2-day, 1 week following it where you get this huge burst of content, and then people are sort of back to doing what they regularly did content wise with some new exciting information, but not more interviews and more reveals and more, it really does feel like you sort of build up this momentum a lot better by staggering out like that with content creators in particular. So yeah, it was a pretty innovative thing that you got going there, working with content creators. Yeah. So we've covered the proudest moment part, but I guess what we should probably talk about now is like, what's your relationship with the game now? Obviously, you have so much going on. You have a new job that you're working at the moment. You are still currently active in a lot of other gaming communities. What's your relationship with WoW like at the moment?
Yeah, I've stepped back from WoW with a very, very purposeful intent to have it be very temporary, because I still love WoW. It's still like a game that is core to my existence as a human, and I owe a lot of where I am today to World of Warcraft. We talked through a lot of that already. So it's still a game that I love, I enjoy, I want to play, and I want to spend a lot of time on. I'm having to sort of like detox my brain when it comes to WoW at the moment, because like all through Shadowlands and then even into Dragonflight, even though I had stepped away past the shortly after the Dragonflight launch. Was it shortly? I actually don't remember what that occurrence of events was. It's been a weird couple of years. Either way, like even into Dragonflight, I was so like in tune with the development process of Dragonflight and understanding what was coming and how all of it was fitting together and everything, that it was difficult for me to play Dragonflight and not still have it feel like work. Like, oh, this is this old job that I used to have, as opposed to this is this game that I love and I'm excited about. That was also part of why I had stepped back away from streaming WoW so much in more recent years, because it wasn't because like literally just playing the game and streaming it especially made me feel like I would be going through it and be like, okay, here's this thing that I've noticed and it reminds me of this meeting that I've had, and so now my work brain is engaged and I'm thinking about work again, and not even in like a negative way, just literally like just compartmentalizing and being like, okay, I'm not just playing a video game right now, I'm I'm no longer able to just enjoy it in the same way, I guess is what I was trying to say. Yeah. So I've needed to step back from WoW for a little bit for now. I'm really excited to find out when they like, basically my plan is to go hard on the next expansion once Dragonflight is over, and I genuinely have no idea what the next expansion is for WoW. That was not a thing that was being talked about at the point when I left the company. So we are now starting to get into the point finally again where I'm just surprised by everything that comes out for WoW. And I'm like, oh, that's new and interesting. Like I've been watching some streams here and there and looking at like the new dungeons and stuff. I'm like, huh, that looks cool. And that looks like something that would be fun to do. So for whatever the next expansion ends up being, that is going to be my point to be like, right, let's get back into WoW. Let's get back into this. Because I will finally be back at the point where I can just be excited as a fan and a player again, looking forward to like BlizzCon's coming up. I am positive that they will announce an expansion there just because that fits the timing so perfectly. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure whatever they've got next is going to be announced at BlizzCon. And I'm finally at the point where I can just sit there and watch the presentation and be like, yes, surprise me, delight me, excite me, make me excited to play this game, because I want to know more about what like the next bit of the story is, and I want to know more about like where are we going next, what are the new systems coming in place, and so on. Let's understand the fun new stuff and actually have it be fun new stuff instead of something that I first heard about 6 months ago when someone was just like, and we'll probably have a feature that looks something like this, but we don't know what that's going to be yet because we haven't made it yet. So we don't, it'll be cool, I promise. And then just like learning bits and bits and bits of it over time. That has a tendency to make me not excited about something. And I'm just like, yeah, I kind of know what that was, but I've kind of known what it was for a long time. I'm excited to be able to experience again, like that feeling of now's all the information and you get to learn everything and just be excited about it.
I mean, it's been a really long time since you've been in that position, right? I mean, since Mists of Pandaria, basically, it was the last time that would have been where it's like you didn't have any kind of work brain information about an entire release, right, at all. And that's 11 years ago now. Mists of Pandaria is almost 11 years old. We're a couple weeks out. So, I mean, that's been a really long time. And I mean, I think at least for me as a player, there's always been a certain element of magic about World of Warcraft, about how the whole world kind of comes together for you as a player. And I can definitely see that, if, for somebody like you, once the layers start getting peeled back because it's part of your professional life, and you're getting exposed to stuff before it even exists in a playable state, that magic could really dissipate. And yeah, I think that could be kind of a bummer. Like I've definitely had that thought myself of like, I don't know if I would ever want to work on the game in any capacity if I had the opportunity, because it's what I like to do in my leisure time, and I like to keep it separate from my professional life.
Yeah, it's definitely John Oliver has a great phrase he calls the sausage principle, which is, if you love something, never find out how it's made.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not that peeking behind the curtain made me dislike WoW or anything. I still love WoW. It's still core. It's still my favorite video game of all time, and it's still very core to like just who I am as a person. But it definitely changed the way in which I experienced it, in a sense and in a way that has made it difficult for me to re-engage with it the way that I used to. So that's why I've been like, okay, no, I'm not going to force myself to play the game. I'm going to step back for a little bit so that hopefully once I am no longer in that headspace where I have all this knowledge and I have all this understanding, and I am predicting accurately where things are going to go based on conversations that I had a year ago. Once I'm in the point where I can be surprised again, that's the point where I can engage with the game in the way that I used to engage with the game on a constant basis, and find it exciting and enjoyable and fun again.
Oh, makes sense. Is there anything that you're and I know what you're doing right now. Is there anything you want to talk about what you're doing right now? People might be curious where you're at gaming wise and
sure
work wise.
Yeah. So I'm working on I'm working at a company called Wonderstorm now. I'm the community lead for Wonderstorm. It's the company that has there's a Netflix series called The Dragon Prince, which if you haven't checked it out, I do recommend you check it out. I will say personally, for me, the first season, the animation is a little rough, but it does clean up after that, and the story is genuinely very, very engaging. So I hadn't watched it before I started talking about this role, and then I watched like one episode, and I was like, okay, no, I need to watch all of this right now. Like I binged the whole, between two interviews, I binged the entirety of 3 seasons of The Dragon Prince, because I was like, and they weren't 2 interviews in the same day. It wasn't that much. But,
the longest day.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, no, I need to absorb this because I'm genuinely super into it. I really like this world. I really like these characters. I really like the story that's being told. I was very excited about that. We have also announced, I have to be careful what I say about this, but we have also announced that there is a video game in development that is set in the Dragon Prince world. And that's where currently a lot of my focus is on sort of early prep and getting stuff. We're not in any state of, we're not even ready to announce it yet. So we're not in any state where there's like anything firmly set in stone. But one thing that Wonderstorm has done that I'm really appreciative of is they've made the decision, we need community people. We need people handling community before we're even ready to talk about the game publicly. So that way, when we are ready to talk about the game publicly, we're ready to go with it. And actually, we've got a good foundation laid, and we've set things up properly. So that's where a lot of my focus is right now, is on that. I'm really excited about it. That's I'm
all you can say. That's fine. That's all you can say. That's fine. Don't worry.
That's all I can say.
I from what I've seen of the TV series, I am excited to see what you choose to do, right? What the team chooses to do as far as a game goes. I think that'll be really a cool thing for folks to check out. So they certainly should go and follow the social medias and, follow along for when whatever this is moves into some sort of alpha beta sort of phase so they can check it out.
Yeah. And it's been really cool working at a actually small company. Like all of I was at Blizzard for 9 years, nearly 10 years. And then I was at TikTok for a year. So all of my like gaming tech industry experience had been at these like huge companies where there's like, okay, do you want to do a thing? Here's the list of 40 different like stakeholders that you need to get that through and everything to be able to do it. Whereas at Wonderstorm, we're a small enough team that it's almost kind of the opposite, where it's like, would you like to do a thing? Yes, please. None of us have time to think about that. So just do whatever you think is best and just go for it. So it's been great being able to like we did we just came out with season 5 recently for the Dragon Prince. And a lot of what we ended up doing community wise for that was just, I kind of went, hey, I've got this idea. And they were like, sure, yeah, go for it. Do whatever you want. And I was like, okay, cool. So I'm going to do this in the Discord. I'm going to do this. They're like, please don't feel like you need to tell me every detail. We hired you into this role because we trust you to do it. So just do it. And I was like, that's weirdly refreshing. That's great to have someone tell me to just shut up and do my job. It's actually great. So that's been awesome. I will also note as well, because a lot of people don't necessarily realize this about Wonderstorm. It was a company that was made to make a TV series and video game at the same time. And so a vast majority of the people at Wonderstorm, including like writers and creators and everyone, actually came from the gaming industry. So it's not like a company that was like, oh, we have a Netflix series that took off and has been really popular. Wouldn't it be cool if we cashed in on that whole video gaming trend? No, like this was the plan from the beginning, and the game is actually exciting, and it's being created by people that know what they're doing. So that's the other aspect of it that's really, really cool to me.
Great. I'd love to hear more about it. When everything is able to be talked about somewhere down the line, we'll get you back on and something can happen. Anyways, thank you so much. I want to give a shout out and thank you to our patrons before we start wrapping things up here. They always contribute a ton to our show, and we appreciate all that they do and give towards the show. I have a few here that I'd like to always highlight, which is Aliana, Sarajian, Butter, Celian, James, Kapawi, Max, Chorl, and Vespin. Thank you so much for everything you give, but also to all of the rest of our patrons. We appreciate everything you do. You make episodes like this possible and help cover, as you know, Josh was talking about earlier, hosting fees and all sorts of other fees that go along with running something like this. So we appreciate it very much. You can find our Patreon over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, patrons. I mean, it's been, the last year or so, calendar year at least, has been really tumultuous with us trying to get regular shows out and trying to maintain a weekly schedule, but we have done it. We haven't slipped any weeks somehow. Nope. We made it happen, and the Patreon support is a big reason that we're able to do that, and that we're able to line stuff up, and also to bring you guys some bonus shows like this one where we kind of take some time out of the normal schedule to just go down a different road and kind of talk about the game in a different perspective. So thank you, patrons, for making it possible.
Yeah, coming up on episode 600, so kind of exciting as we get closer and closer to that. And this might come out after that, so just as a heads up, if this is like, I don't know, 605, you understand when we recorded it now. But yeah, it's always been a really fun time. And thank you again, Josh, for popping in. I'll let you plug some stuff here in a second, but if you folks have enjoyed this episode, another great way to support the show is going over to your iTunes, drop a podcast, and leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate those reviews, and we like reading them here on our episodes. So we'll get another one of those out with our weekly episode next week. That's going to wrap up this episode of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can go over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. You can also join our Discord, thestartingzone.com/Discord, or you can sort of hop on Twitter or other social medias at The Starting Zone and find us there. And Jason, do you want to plug yourself first?
I would love to plug myself. You can come follow me at on Twitter. I'm not going to say the other name of the website. Still, even if this episode comes out 6 weeks in the future, I'll still be calling it Twitter. I don't care. Find me over there at Shieldwald, and you can also find me on Blue Sky if you look hard enough, but I'm not posting anything over there yet, but come find me. Video channels are at twitch.tv/Shieldwald and youtube.com/Shieldwald, although streams remain on hiatus because of my ongoing dispute with my ISP. So until I can get like solid, decent upstream on a consistent basis, I will probably not be streaming, but I don't know. I want to get back into it. I miss doing it. It's a fun part of raid nights always. And people have been following me, even though I've kind of publicly said the stream is on hiatus. So thank you guys for checking in, and hopefully we'll have some stuff back up there if I can ever get Comcast to cooperate.
Good to know. And yeah, Josh, was there something else you'd like to plug your socials for, your streams for, your whatnot for?
Sure, yeah. You can find me as Devolore pretty much anywhere. DEVOLORE. I've been fortunate that I accidentally picked a name that no one else ever wants, so I'm usually able to get it on pretty much every platform. So whatever platform you're looking at, look for Devolore. I'm probably there, even if I'm not necessarily using it regularly, like Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, etc. I do stream pretty regularly still as well. Mostly been doing a lot of RP stuff lately, which occasionally features one Spencer as well. True. So it's been super cool getting to do a lot of that. And also, if you are interested in the game that I'm working on, we do have semi-regular pre-alpha playtests at the moment, and you can sign up for those if you go to wonderstorm.net/Project Arcanum. There is a sign-up sheet there. You can fill that out and maybe get a peek at what we're working on at some point. But,
Ooh,
yeah.
Cool. Yes, I do occasionally do the RPs stuff with the Devolore, which is a lot of fun. So if you do want to tune into his streamy things, you can occasionally catch me wandering around as a variety of characters that we end up interacting on, which is great. You can find me over on Twitter's at Spencer_Downey. I do have a Twitch channel at twitch.tv/SpencerHD. I also have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/@SpencerHD. And yeah, with that, I guess we want to say, for Jason and myself, and for Devolore, aka Josh, thanks for listening, and jobs done.